To our other video for this week. In this video, I'm going to be discussing Diary of a Madman and our author Lu Xun. Now, if you happen to watch this video before you watched our other one, this is just a reminder that Kaltura has been a little bit weird this week, so I'm going to be recording some of our videos and then putting them on YouTube. So good job finding the link and following the instructions for that. And we're going to have some pretty short video lectures this week because we have a shorter week. We have your second paper due on the 3rd, so I didn't want you to have too much to think about when I know you definitely want to be wrapping up that paper. And I talked about this a little bit at the end of the other video, but I also wanted to bring it up here. You still have time, as long as you're not watching this at 11:59 on Friday, you still have time to contact me about working on that paper. So if you need some help with the rough draft or revision, do please let me know. We can set up a Zoom appointment still sometime during the week, ideally Monday evening or Thursday or Friday evening still. Let's just not wait until the last minute on that. So if you need help, again, please let me know. So getting back to Diary of Madman for our week 7 notes here. Lu Xun was a pen name. So authors over the years sometimes choose a pen name to kind of give themselves some anonymity. They'll use this pseudonym maybe to protect themselves from critics or from politicians or people who might kind of try and change their situation, make things kind of difficult for them depending on their views. For Lu Xun, though, people did realize that this was his pen name, so he kind of got figured out. So it's a pretty open thing now. It's not too much of a secret who he was. He was born in 1881 in China, and he had a really varied career. He attended different types of schools. I've listed here the Naval Academy, a medical academy. So he was trying out different fields, but he really fell in love with literature, and it led him to pursuing a career in education. So he was a teacher. He had gone to work for the Ministry of Education and then would also lecture at universities. So a very varied career here. And he was largely influenced in part from his education, from also being exposed to Western culture. So he would bring into his work some of the elements that he was seeing from stories in other cultures. He wrote essays and stories. Some of his lectures were also published, so you can find more work by him out there. And his mother, when he was younger, forced him into an arranged marriage, so chose a wife for him. And because this wasn't a marriage out of love, and because neither of them was really fully on board with this marriage, it kind of fell apart. So he left his first wife, but felt bad about doing that, for breaking this vow. And so he continued to send money throughout his career to support her, to make sure that she was taken care of. And then later on, years later, as he got older, he met someone and married her, and then they had a son. So he did have a happier family life later on. Lu Xun has been considered a socialist. He's been called that before, but he didn't formally declare himself a part of any party. So he could have joined the Socialist Party that was in China at this time, but he didn't align himself fully with them. And then later, after his death, politicians would try and claim his work to use for propaganda purposes. So in his own lifetime, censorship laws were becoming more restrictive. The political climate was changing. And so he had to be careful about how he wrote things, because he could have gotten in trouble. He could have been arrested. All these things could have happened to him. And so he kind of lost his desire to write fiction. He wanted to write things that challenged the norms, that challenged the standards. But again, it could be somewhat dangerous for him. So he didn't really want to write as much toward the end of his life. And then again, as I was mentioning, after his death, some of his work was appropriated as propaganda. So politicians would quote him, would try and say that Lu Xun would have liked this idea, or he would have been on board with this thing, to try and get the people, the readers who had loved his work, to be on board, to say, oh, well, I do agree with those ideas. But they're likely things, those closest to him would say those are likely things he would have actually disagreed with, that he wouldn't have wanted to be used for those purposes. So going on here, Diary of a Madman has also been translated as A Madman's Diary, and you want to be careful if you're looking up the story, if you're trying to do some more research on the background of the story, because the title takes its name from a story by Russian author Nikolai Gogol, who also wrote a story about a madman, and his story goes off the rails in other ways, a little bit different than our story. But I have had students before who somehow read the Gogol version and then wrote a paper about that. So make sure you don't do that. Please make sure that you're reading the Lu Xun version that's in our textbook here. If you read a story about something happening in Russia, again, different story altogether. But because Lu Xun was so well read, he already knew about this other story. He just wanted to borrow the title for his own here. It's not really plagiarism as we might think of it as being. It's kind of just a shout out of, hey, I liked this story. I'm going to borrow the title here and also write about a madman. So Diary of a Madman here. The story is structured as a framed narrative, and we've come across that before, where we have a story within a story. And what that's being used for here is to kind of add to the realism. It's kind of like playing that game of telephone that, oh, I heard this thing, I'm going to pass it along. And so we have that happening again here, that, oh, we have our first narrator who has gone to visit some childhood friends and finds out that one of them has been unwell and now he's okay. But the other brother, who's been sane the whole time, gives him the diary to see this is what happened. This is what he went through. Now, at the beginning of the story, we already know that the madman has regained his senses. He's gone off to get a government position, which is kind of a bit of commentary from our author Lu Xun here, saying he was considered insane, but now he's better, supposedly, and he's going to go take this government position. So, kind of an interesting commentary there, taking a little bit of a jab at politics and that. And he's regained his senses, so it's a temporary thing that's not fully explained. Within the story, and this is going to be something that's very weird for a lot of readers, we have a madman who's scared that everyone in his village practices cannibalism. So he's afraid that they're out to get him, that they're eating each other. He thinks that maybe they ate his younger sister, that that's the explanation for her death. And so there's really this sense of paranoia that's pervasive throughout the story here. And if we read it very literally, it's just creepy. You might have been a little bit weirded out by it. That's okay, to think that he's afraid of cannibalism, that he thinks everyone's out to get him, or maybe you see him as being genuinely crazy as well, and that can also be upsetting for our readers and for our character here. But we can also see this as being some symbolism, that there's this paranoia happening as politics are starting to change, as social structures are starting to change, and so people could be afraid that their neighbors are going to turn on them, not as actual cannibalism, that they're not actually eating each other, but that people could be turning each other in, so could be kind of telling on each other to authorities for having ideas that are out there, or that they could be willing to step on others to move up in their jobs or in social spheres. So it's kind of commentary on what people might be willing to do to advance their own situation in life, and that our madman, who is making all these claims and may seem outlandish, maybe he's the one who's sane because he doesn't want to turn against others. So there's different ways to kind of interpret what's happening to him here. We've got the very literal madman situation where he's making things up, where he's raving about things. And then there's the other side of it where there's a little spark of sanity in there, that we have someone who's trying to say we shouldn't turn on each other, we need to look out for each other. So different sides to the story here. And then lastly, we have a narrator who is an unreliable narrator. And we've seen a little bit before in our other stories that when we have a narrator who is also a character in the story, so if you think of Victor Frankenstein, or if we think of Aphra-Behns' fictionalized version of herself, who is the narrator in Orinoco, we've seen a little bit before how when you have a narrator who's also a character in the story, their biases can come through. We can see that we only have a limited view of what's happening in the story, that their own views, the narrator's views, are coloring the story as a reflection of how the author may see things, or maybe challenging things they see. So in this case, of course, Lu Xun is not trying to paint himself as being this character. This is separate from himself, but he's given us this narrator who is unreliable, who we can't quite believe. And some of this is exposed in our footnotes for things. We have our narrator who is misquoting different things. We can also see by the end of the story, when he supposedly has regained his sanity, that his brother was not out to get him. His brother just wanted him to get well and move on to get his job. So we have a narrator who is our only way to view the story, and yet he's not entirely telling us the truth. So that makes things a little bit tricky. And then we also have our original narrator who has claimed to go visit these friends and then read this diary. So a lot of different layers to things here, and definitely a kind of strange, different story. And this is where we're still in realism territory. We could have this situation happen. Someone could be afraid that the people around them are are cannibals. And then we start to veer into surrealism just a little bit if we think that the narrator might have a point about these things. So again, a sort of different type of story here, a different narrator than we've been used to up until this point. And so we're seeing how authors are starting to experiment with their stories and with their characters and even their narrators just a little bit, where the plot of the story and the narrator himself aren't going to follow the conventions that we were used to before this period. And this will kind of spark opportunity for future authors to kind of play around a little bit with the storytelling, with the narrators, with the settings, with the plots, with the order of things. We also, similar to our other reading, if we think of the Metamorphosis, have a very limited setting in this story. So we have stories moving from characters going on a journey, from traveling, to having very isolated environments, and that can bring for our authors different limitations, but also different ways to kind of get creative. So again, another trend to kind of keep an eye on as we move forward. We'll see how other stories use different spaces, whether it's a room or a journey, and how that kind of reflects what's going on in society at the time. So with that, I'm going to wrap up our discussion of Diary of a Madman. Again, we kind of have a shorter week this week, so I want to keep our videos nice and short for you so that you can go on to working on that paper. But do still make sure you check out the things that we have going on in the module. So we've got some additional videos and other things for you to read, kind of supplement our understanding of our stories this week. And as always, if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, make sure you reach out and let me know either in a Canvas message or an email so we can make sure that you're feeling good about our readings and our assignments coming up. With that, though, I hope you have a great rest of your day. I know we had a very rainy weekend if you were here in Michigan, so let's hope that we have some sunshine going forward here and nice summer days this week. And happy 4th of July to those of you who are going to be celebrating that. Those of you who are not, hope you enjoy having a long weekend here. LTU is closed for the 4th and the 5th, so we're going to give everyone a little mini long weekend here in the middle of things. All right, again, have a great rest of your day, everybody, and we'll see you in the next one.